Hello, I'm Donald Macaulay, and welcome to this BMJ Leader Conversation, where we talk to the key opinion leaders in health and medicine around the world. Today, we're talking to Oscar Lyons, who's originally from New Zealand but based in Oxford now. Let's take you back to the very beginning, to your school days. Were you always a leader?
That's a tough question, Donald. I think when I grew up in New Zealand, I grew up in a little family, three brothers, my mum, my father, who are both musicians, which means we were really struggling for income a lot of the time. And so we had a very low income, lots of economic instability, and lots of music in our lives. But that doesn't always make up for financial instability. So I think I came up with a lot of fear that things would go wrong. And so ended up often in positions where I was able to help influence the way things went, to help prevent things from going wrong. Um, that kind of led me into medicine, really, because a teacher of mine suggested that I should have a think about it. And I realized that there were a few jobs that had as good job security as medicine. Fine, you won't make a massive amount of money in medicine, but there is definitely a lot of job security working in medicine. And that took me through medical school, and then I started work in a very rural place in New Zealand. We only had nine what we call resident medical officers, junior doctors there. And I found myself at a point where I was, I think, pretty clinically competent for the role being asked of me, but really out of my depth in terms of leadership. And so I ended up applying for a scholarship to come over and do a
Okay,
doctorate.
well,
So, of
let's stop you there for a moment and wind the
course.
clock back a little bit. So I read a piece in the New Zealand Herald that suggested that your life was molded by a traumatic experience.
Yeah, so I talked about economic instability. When I was 10 years old, my mum and my three brothers and I needed to escape from my father. So we escaped out of Dunedin with the help of the police and Women's Refuge, and came to Auckland on the other island of New Zealand with literally a couple of black plastic sacks full of clothes and shoes for the children. So yeah, not just economic instability, there was definitely some family stability, although a massive amount of love and care. It was amazing strength that my mother in particular had to be able to take four children out of a situation like that.
We talked a little bit about leadership at school, but you were involved in a number of organizations when you were a student also.
Yeah, bits and pieces. Again, I think I was always in these positions of wanting to help make sure that things didn't go wrong. When I played football, soccer, I was always the defender that was at the back that would try and prevent things from going backwards. And so when there was need for people to step up into some roles at university, absolutely, I took those on. So I was. I think education events coordinator for the Auckland University Medical Students Association while I was in medical school for sure.
Now, Oscar, during your medical career, there's something you did that was really different for a New Zealander. Tell us about your elective.
So in my medical elective in my final year in medical school, I ended up going for a two-part elective, half in Fort William in Scotland and the other half in Shetland, in Lerwick specifically in the Shetland Islands. It was an absolutely incredible time for me. There is no music I have come across anywhere in the world like that in Shetland, particularly in the winter, which was when I went.
Well, it wasn't all music. Tell us a little bit about the medicine as well.
So medicine's really interesting. I obviously had an interest in rural medicine. And in Shetland, it is a 12-hour ferry ride or an hour and a half flight north of Aberdeen. So it's one of the most isolated places in the United Kingdom. And that means that there are specific challenges in the healthcare there that there are a few other places. It means that they have to deal with a much higher level of uncertainty and have to be able to deal with emergencies in a level that most other regional hospitals don't need to no, don't need to. I often teach actually about how I saw some of the surgeons operating in Shetland because they're quite aware there that their that their complication rates are a little higher than on the mainland because they are so much more stretched in terms of their scope of practice. And I haven't seen anywhere else such a willingness for consultant surgeons to band together and support each other through complicated operations. So we often saw two consultant or even three consultant surgeons assisting each other in operations to help make sure that they were able to deliver the best possible care they could for their patients, who were incredibly grateful to be able to have the opportunity to be treated close to home with their family at hand, rather than being shipped over to the mainland and to be so far away from family during the stressful time that is any operation there.
So then you qualified, and as you say, you went to a rural practice or rural hospital. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I worked in Tairāwhiti District Health, which is in Gisborne, in a really small town in the East Cape of New Zealand. As said, with just a few of us there, and it's one of the only places in New Zealand that has a Māori majority population there, and our patients in the hospital were 80% Māori, and that really had an influence on our experience there, working with the richness across New Zealand Pākehā and Māori cultures. So we had a lot of Māori culture, Māori language imbued into our work there. And it was also very, very hard work at times. One of the things that comes with being in that area, there's very low socioeconomic status, and that in combination with Māori ethnicity, which is in itself, I think, often a disadvantage in terms of health for people in New Zealand. There's inequity of access to health for Māori people. We ended up seeing a lot of very, very late stage disease progression, and having to work with people who are in really, really difficult life circumstances to try and help support them through what is always a difficult experience, being in hospital and being unwell.
So you've spoken about these people who had very difficult socioeconomic conditions, and you're talking about their medical problems. But then you took a major turn in your own career. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I'd always been interested in asking questions through medical school. I think it was quite natural for me to go on to further studies, and specifically doctoral studies. And the way that happened was a friend of mine, Nick, had suggested that I applied for the Rhodes Scholarship to come over to Oxford right at the end of medical school, and I'd been rejected out of hand, hadn't even gotten through the first step of that. But another wonderful mentor of mine, Matt Linden, who worked in the South Auckland clinical campus, suggested that I apply again. And I was lucky enough to get through not just that first stage, but all the way through the second time round. And so I was given an opportunity to come over to Oxford to focus study on whatever I wanted to study. I was at the time also very interested in mental health of health professionals. But I realized that really we're in a space where we know quite a lot about the poor mental health of health professionals, and what needs to be done is we need to make some changes for that. So that really aligned with my interest in leadership, which had been stoked in part through extra work I'd done with the New Zealand Rotary and New Zealand Army through medical school, and through my experiences of being out of my depth in terms of leadership. And for me, leadership is about achieving results with and through others. And that for me is what was needed in the mental health space as well. We need to actually make changes for the better to try and support our staff, and trying to support those staff members in terms of how they interact with others in their teams and with their patients and with their organizations and systems to try and get the results they want for their patients. That all sounded like leadership to me. And so I came over to Oxford to do my DPhil focused on healthcare leadership development.
Well, let's ask you a little bit more about the Rhodes Scholarship. Tell us more about the process, what the Rhodes Scholar aims to do, and why it was conceived, and who should apply for it.
So the Rhodes Scholarship is a fairly famous international scholarship to Oxford University. Has been contentious at times in its past. but its aim really is to support the development of a group of young people to be leaders in their given generation. So it focuses on four particular elements. Academic strength is the first and foremost of those, but then on three other elements as well, being essentially energy, often exemplified by activity in sports, your cultural and your cultural activities. So for me, it was particularly music, and then the dedication to our communities and to service. And they often say that one of the things that characterizes Rhodes Scholarship as scholars is fundamentally about energy to try and make the most of the opportunities we have. And so there are 100-odd Rhodes Scholars internationally, some of them from specific areas, but also some global scholars, which means that people can apply from wherever they wish in the world. And it gives us a really incredible opportunity to be part of a cohort of just outstanding people and to be supported to study whatever we wish in Oxford. That might help us in that achieving impact within our communities.
So you have this wonderful opportunity to study anything you want. Tell us about the process of choosing what you decided to study.
For me, it was quite a backwards process, actually. I thought that I wanted to come here and to study a master's in higher education and then to go on to look at doing a DPhil, a PhD, in something related to leadership in healthcare. But one of my mentors at the time, Prof. Andrew Hill, talked about the difference between a master's degree and a PhD. A master's degree, he was saying, is fundamentally about what it says on the tin, attaining mastery in a particular field. That means that someone has decided what constitutes mastery in a field, and you learn the things that they have set out for you. Whereas a doctoral studies, a DPhil, is about trying to learn how to question our assumptions and ask really good questions so that we can try and increase the body of knowledge in an area. So it's not so much about gaining mastery of an area, it's about really learning to change our mindset to work towards figuring out what our assumptions are and finding out what further questions we need to ask along the way.
So we've gone through this process, but now you're involved in many different aspects of leadership teaching in Oxford.
Yeah, so that really happened by accident at the start, because I was specifically focused on trying to elucidate the elements of leadership development that we needed to get into medical schools, into already really quite cramped curricula. And I realized that we didn't know enough about how to evaluate leadership development programs to really know what worked. And so my DPhil focus changed slightly towards evaluation. And along the way, I was asked by one of the directors of medical education at Oxford University Hospitals if I'd be interested in a program for young qualified doctors who are on representative committees to try and support them. I actually at the time thought that he was asking me about evaluating the program, and then he said, "Can you set it up in 6 weeks?" And I got the idea quite quickly. It took a bit longer than 6 weeks. We took about 4 months to put together that first program, which itself was only about 4 months long. But from then I got involved in both running and evaluating leadership development. And what I realized is that what we learned through the research that I was doing, the systematic reviews that I was publishing in the area, really there's such a massive industry around leadership development. And so much of that is driven by financial factors rather than by research and by trying to have as much as possible impact. And what that means is that there are a lot of providers out there who would never look at my research, and the ones who would look at the research really are most of the way there because they are already saying, what is the best evidence and how can we improve our programs? And so I realized that by delivering programs, by showing best practice in integrating evaluation and integrating best practices of evidence into those programs, we could work as role models to try and show people what really good leadership development was. And that ended up going in two directions. I ended up setting up an organization called Thrum Leadership, which is where I deliver my leadership development programs as a consulting form, so working outside of Oxford, as well as delivering programs directly within Oxford University. So I run a master's module for the Masters in Surgical Science here on leadership and management. And for a year, I was the program director for the Masters in Global Healthcare Leadership here as well.
So do you see the future as being Thrum Leadership?
Absolutely not. So I mean, we never set up with the idea of taking over. The reason we completely organically developed, we never tried to reach out and to get more customers. It was always to do with people coming to us and asking us to run more programs based on the reputation, based on the quality of the programs we were delivering. I love the autonomy of running an organization and being able to just change things when our knowledge of best practices change, when we notice things that we could improve, when we do our evaluations and we find areas that could be better, we can just change those. And so for me, it is a wonderful vehicle that allows us to have impact. It helps bring in the funding that I use for my research through Thrum Leadership specifically. So it funds a wide range of research, including a big umbrella review of other systematic reviews of leadership development across healthcare that will hopefully come out in a couple of months' time. Running programs through Thrum has given me the flexibility to do research and to apply it into practice. I see it as an option to be role models rather than something that will take over. There is no way that one organization can provide all that we need to support clinicians and non-clinicians in their leadership development throughout their careers. It is a massive job that needs to be done. And so I want us to be an organization that can help other organizations look at us and say, oh, we could do those things. We could implement evidence in that way. We could have more impact for our clinicians, for the teams they work with, the hospitals, the organizations, the systems they work with, and for the patients that fundamentally they serve.
So the obvious question then is, what is the future?
For me or for Thrum?
For you? Oh, I guess they're both intertwined.
Yeah, they certainly are. So I haven't worked clinically in a number of years now, and I really do miss the feeling of knowing that I did something worthwhile on a given day. Research and running programs is a much longer game, and I'm aware that we can have a lot more impact through research, through education, through leadership than as individual clinicians. I do miss the day-to-day satisfaction. I love teaching, and so I definitely want to have teaching as an element of my career heading forwards. And I really want to try and help us have more impact through supporting people in this really essential part of the work that they do in healthcare.
And finally, I should ask you, and I know you're an accomplished musician, where is music in your life now?
All over the place. I had 3 gigs last weekend and I have 2 gigs this coming weekend. And I knew when I was young that being a musician was too economically unstable a career for me to feel comfortable in it. But I grew up with massive love for music. Music is something that for me brings me connection with friends and ability to connect with the audiences we play with. It is an element of creativity, of mindfulness, of focus on something, of learning. It's an incredibly important part of my life. So I absolutely want to keep it in my life. At the moment, it's mostly singing with jazz big bands in Oxford, although I also play bass guitar sometimes for the big bands or for our small jazz combo. But it is just a wonderful way for me of connecting with people, of being well and healthy, and really enjoying life, enjoying our time together.
Oscar, thank you very much for talking to us today, sharing your leadership journey and your musical career. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Donald.